There are more than 10,000 tiny homes in the U.S., and their numbers are getting bigger. We found this one for sale on YouTube, and the owner is promoting its collapsible roof.
Welcome to our tiny house. The roof is 17 and a half feet tall, stationary, but each roof is on a hinge, and then the roof will lay flat for traveling on the road.
How big are they? Not usually that big. Generally, they range from 100 to 600 square feet. That's 6 times smaller than the average home. One study found more than half of Americans say they would consider living in one.
They can be built less expensively, faster. They can be sustainably built, so they're energy efficient.
3 local efforts are underway to build tiny home villages for the chronically unhoused. Some get their inspiration from Community First in Austin, Texas.
We are going to have to return back to this type of housing units for people that live in extreme poverty in our country. That's the bottom line.
And local organizers are already thinking about how many more they could help.
I'll say it. We want this to be a start. We don't want this to be the end.
Today on the pod, tiny homes, how much they cost, who lives in them, and how they can house people who live on the streets, some of them veterans. Let's get into it. This is Brick by Brick, solutions for a thriving community.
Brick by Brick is made possible thanks to leading support from AES Ohio Foundation, Greater Cincinnati Foundation, and George and Margaret McLean Foundation, with additional support from Lori F. Johnston, Murray and Agnes Seasongood Good Government Foundation, the Robert and Adele Schiff Family Foundation, and more. Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Brick by Brick, where we're highlighting solutions for a thriving community in Southwest Ohio. I'm your host, Ann Thompson. Some say the poet Henry David Thoreau built the original tiny house in 1845. It was only 150 square feet. You can see the cabin's site at Walden Pond in Concord, Massachusetts, where he escaped to live a simpler life. Tiny homes don't have to be that small. They officially can be as large as 600 square feet and as luxurious or as plain as you want them. YouTuber Jenna Kozel built her own tiny home in 2014, and in her series, Tiny House Giant Journey asks why we don't see tiny homes built by their owners anymore.
So what has happened to the DIY aspect of the tiny house movement? Well, tiny homes have become more legal in more areas, and more companies have decided to produce them.
She says that's good and bad. Even though there are more opportunities for people to live in tiny homes, there are a lot of gray areas and legalities related to zoning, like parking. And if you built your own tiny home, it may not have the certifications required to park in certain areas, and you might find it harder to get insurance. In one episode, she highlights 5 people who did build their own tiny home, including Macy Miller. She spent just $11,000, including appliances. Here's Jenna again.
Now, this is one of the reasons tiny homes in the beginning were popular, because people could build them extremely cheap and live debt-free.
Amazon and Walmart sell tiny homes for less than $16,000, but you have to have land to put it on, build a foundation, and account for the cost of plumbing and electricity. Most tiny homes cost about $52,000. That's still 87% less than a traditional home. The top 10 states for tiny homes are in the Northeast and the Northwest: Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, Wyoming, Washington, Idaho, Montana, Oregon, Rhode Island, and Alaska. Women make up the majority of tiny home residents, and their ages vary, an equal number between 30 and 50 and 50 plus. In some parts of the world, tiny homes don't require you to have a permit because they are considered vehicles. Many see tiny homes as a possible answer to the affordable housing crisis and as a solution to homelessness, including Alan Graham, who started one of the oldest and largest tiny home villages. It's in Austin, Texas.
We have 550 homes right now, and nearly 500 people are living here. We will add to that over the next several years, 1,400 more homes.
In the early 2000s, the CEO of Mobile Loaves and Fishes, which runs Community First Village, began lifting people off the streets in gently used RVs. The organization eventually transitioned to tiny homes. Graham says the biggest challenge for people trying to do this is the not in my backyard mentality.
There are stereotypes and biases that have been perpetrated around men and women that are chronically homeless that frankly scares people. And so we had to overcome that.
He is overcoming that, and making it easier to build is a lack of zoning outside Texas municipalities. Community First is privately funded and has 127 acres. The previously chronically homeless who live there pay rent that's about 35 to 40% of their income. Community First has enterprise opportunities, allowing residents to work in an organic farming operation, an on-site bed and breakfast, in a wood shop, a ceramic studio, and more. They can stay as long as they want.
Anecdotally, we actually settle people pretty profoundly. I mean, 85% of the people that move in are going to stay with us long term.
And when they die, the village will inter their ashes, carving their name in granite on the property. Unlike Community First's permanent housing model, Vista Village in Columbus is transitional housing, where residents stay for up to 2 years before finding their own place. The faith-based tiny home village, which opened in January, is the brainchild of John Perez.
We serve 5 different population groups, including individuals living on the land who want to transition out, veterans, people returning to society from incorporation, people in recovery from some type of addiction, kids aging out of foster care.
The 41 tiny homes, complete with kitchen, bedroom, and bath, are on 15 acres and are mostly privately funded. Some community members and businesses are even sponsoring a tiny house.
The most heartwarming aspect of it was when we had the first individual move in and we introduced her to the person who had sponsored her house. And it was electrifying. I mean, they hugged each other. They were just kept talking and trying to get to know each other better. And the resident was so appreciative to have her own house.
There is also a community center where on the day Brick by Brick interviewed Perez, residents were planning a taco dinner. Perez is already thinking about Phase 2, which will serve single parents, also using a tiny home model. Instead of the 420 square feet like the current ones, the family model would be 660. Unibuilt Custom Homes manufactured the Vista Village tiny modular homes. Just 3 miles away from Unibuilt's Vandalia plant north of Dayton is another planned tiny home village. Brick by Brick's Emiko Moore checked in with the organizers of the future Beacon Place Village.
Leading a bold new plan to address the need for stable, affordable housing for the homeless, Debbie Watts Robinson, CEO of the Miami Valley Housing Opportunities, also known as MVHO, is working to build a tiny home village in Northeast Dayton.
So I see this as a cost-effective way to be able to provide housing, not just for the homeless, but for others. But we're starting out with a preference for people who are really living unsheltered in our Beacon Place Village.
MVHO, which has about 50 buildings in Montgomery County, provides housing mainly for those who are homeless with a disability. Heather Wilson oversees the Street Outreach Program.
We are the only agency in Montgomery County that offers street outreach services to the unsheltered population and provides them with that case management and ultimately housing. There's nobody else in this county that does what we do, so we are very unique. 2 years ago, we saw a 16% increase in the homeless population. Last year, that number went down ever so slightly. The 16% increase is the highest we've ever seen, ever.
According to the Homeless Solutions Policy Board, on a single night in 2024, 687 people were in shelters or sleeping unsheltered in Montgomery County.
It's a whole lot cheaper to help someone stay in the housing that we provide than it is for them to be just out there in the system. Going to the emergency rooms, you name it, all the things that happens when people don't have a place to live.
Robinson researched other tiny home communities, including Community First in Austin, Texas, and Vista Village in Columbus, Ohio, before choosing a local home builder, Unibuilt.
The houses themselves, they are about 450 square feet with about 50 square foot on a front porch, okay? They will include a kitchen. They will include a small sitting area, a bedroom, and a bath. We're also going to have and we say a very robust community center because we want a place where people can come and provide services to the folks living in the community. And it may even be a place where some of the other folks who are living on the streets still might be able to come in and get some services because we'll have services on site.
The 40-unit Beacon Place Village would serve different housing needs.
Some people cannot stay with other people, maybe due to their mental health diagnoses or whatever the case may be. And then we've got other people that work better in a group, so to speak.
Tenants in the tiny home village would be responsible for paying 30% of their income toward rent. One potential resident could be Keith Monin, who grew up in Dayton and graduated from Meadowdale High School and went on to earn an associate's degree at Sinclair.
Let me put it this way. When I was a kid, I always asked why, what? Father said, why don't you read an encyclopedia? Literally, I did read the entire encyclopedia.
But over the years, his housing journey has taken many turns.
I never say I am homeless because that's a noun. I usually make it a verb or adverb because at some point I know when I'm done with this, it's just this experience. It's a learning experience. That's all it is.
We showed Keith some pictures of the design concept.
What are your thoughts on that?
Actually, I think that's a good thing because, see, you don't want to, when you're in a multifamily, you just have a small space and that's your space. In this way, this is your own space. If I actually have an address, this is my address. And I could say that there's a sense of pride in that. Whereas before you feel a sense of disconnect, and I think that's what happens when you become in a homeless situation.
We don't want our people isolating themselves in their own units or in their own homes. We want people to have pride in where they're living. We want them to be neighborly. We want this to feel like not only their home, but their own community as well.
But to build that vision, they will have to raise several more $1 million. MVHO has secured the property on Needmore Road, the home builder, and the construction company. Debbie Watts Robinson says they've raised $3.5 million of the $8 to $9 million they need.
We're very optimistic that, we can have this completed within 2 years now. You have to admit, as a community, there's always going to be people out there who really don't have anybody, okay? Who need somebody to make sure that they have a safe place to live. So here at MVHO, our vision is a community where everyone has a place they can call home. And that's what drives us every day.
For Brick by Brick, this is Amy Comore in Dayton.
It seems the city of Dayton also believes in what Miami Valley Housing Opportunities is trying to do with its Beacon Place Village development. They, along with the Ohio Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, as well as the Federal Home Loan Bank of Cincinnati, are some of the initial funders. We'll, of course, keep an eye on their progress and bring you updates here on the pod or on the web. Plans for a tiny home village are also in the works in Cincinnati. Retired architect Earl Crossland and his friend Larry Plum have launched Tiny Homes for Humanity to help veterans who are unhoused. Right now, they're focused on finding a place to build the village. Plum is talking to the port and others.
The big problem is so much of the land is committed to other uses. And so we're trying to work through that and just talking to other organizations that may have 2 or 3 acres that they'd turn loose of, and that's all we need. Once we get that, then we can start expanding into other things.
Crossland hands over a sheet with a long list of names he and Plum have met with already, including the mayor, Hamilton County Commissioner Denise Driehaus, the Metropolitan Housing Authority, veterans groups, and activists like Kevin Finn, various shelters, Habitat for Humanity, and others. He says they're all supportive.
So our initial concept or prototype is a 253 square foot tiny home. That's the inside square footage. And that is based on the city of Cincinnati has a minimum standard for a dwelling of 250 square feet.
Crossland estimates 24 tiny homes with a 3,000 square foot community building on 2 acres would cost about $4 to $5 million.
Each home would be about $60,000. We're also thinking that this might be developed in phases so that we wouldn't have to do all 25 at once, but that would be the goal.
Crossland and Plum are confident that once the land is identified, the other pieces will fall into place. Coming up on Brick by Brick, how well do tiny home villages serve the unhoused? And why this model seems to work well for veterans.
I see them moving on, finding work, and realize there's more to life than the way they've been living.
Just ahead, the Clermont County Veterans Village. Planned cottages slightly bigger than a tiny home.
Brick by Brick is made possible thanks to the generous support of so many, including Diane and Dave Moshe, P&G, the Camden Foundation, the Stephen H. Wilder Foundation, Rosemary and Mark Schlachter, a donation in memory of Frank and Margaret Linhart, the A.T. Folger Jr., Low Simpson Fund, and more. Thank you. We couldn't do this work without you.
Hey, we all have a different story, even if we grew up in the same neighborhood or city, especially if we're talking about housing stories. Hi, my name is Mark Lammers, executive producer for Brick by Brick. Growing up, I lived on the west side of Cincinnati in a single-family home, but I've also experienced apartment life in good and bad settings in a number of different cities. I learned a lot from those times in my life and from my journey as a whole. Now we want to hear about your housing story. That's the new audience question that's live on our show pages at thinktv.org and cetconnect.org. Log in and hit the green button to share your journey and what you learned from it. We hope to share some of your experiences and lessons as we move forward on Brick by Brick so we can all get smarter together. Thanks.
Welcome back to Brick by Brick. Portland State University looked at the effectiveness of tiny pod villages as an alternative to shelters for people experiencing homelessness in 2022. Specifically, researchers studied Dignity Village in Portland by doing 80 in-depth interviews and more than 2,000 community surveys. Here's what they found. Residents appreciate having a voice in their tiny home community, and this had a huge impact on villager satisfaction. 86% were largely or very satisfied with their pod. Most neighbors who reported concerns about the village at first said they no longer had those concerns. Additionally, villages have disproportionately served white men. Only 17% identify as BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color. The people interviewed made some suggestions. They include integrating tiny home villages into emergency preparedness plans and designing villages to better support parents. In a separate study, the AMARC Foundation funded research by Pepperdine University graduate students to determine the effectiveness of the Village for Vets in Los Angeles. They found the low barrier to entry housing is essential in helping get some veterans off the streets, and it's preferable to other housing options in part because of its close proximity to health care on the VA campus. The students were unable to get comprehensive funding and budgetary information from the VA and could not conduct an accurate cost analysis. Between 2020 and 2022, there was a 6% decrease in veteran homelessness in LA thanks to efforts like Village for Vets. A veterans project with cottages is front and center in Clermont County, where construction is scheduled for later this year on Veterans Village, just outside Felicity. There are over 12,000 veterans living in the county, and about 6% of them are homeless or on the verge of being homeless. Alicia Morlott is executive director of the Clermont Metropolitan Housing Authority.
It is a whole huge community endeavor. It's amazing how Clermont County embraces their veterans. And right now, because we don't have a homeless shelter, a stick and brick homeless shelter, a lot of our veterans and homeless in general are basically told we don't have resources here in the county because they're very limited, but you can go to Hamilton County and Boone and Butler County. So a lot of our veterans, while they're not currently living in Clermont County, they want to return to Clermont County, and this is going to allow them a vehicle to do so.
Morlott explains that honorably discharged veterans facing homelessness and having a physical or mental disability are eligible. They can use HUD-VASH vouchers or Veterans Affairs supportive housing for homeless veterans to pay rent. County Commissioner Bonnie Batchler has been instrumental in Veterans Village.
I've said it many a times, no veteran that has served this country should have to live in conditions like that. And if we can do something that will give them a new start on life, give them a place to live, to get their life back together, and I think we owe it to them.
The furnished cottages on 10 acres in Franklin Township near Felicity are a little bigger than tiny homes at about 700 to 1,000 square feet. Economic and Community Development Administrator Desmond Mayada explains the reason these houses are a little bigger is to allow for wheelchairs and service animals.
The plan is to start with 19 units and get those under construction by the end of the summer. Most of those will be one-bedroom units. There will be some two-bedroom units. And again, fully furnished units, internet access. The utilities are included in what the veteran pays.
Veterans Village is walkable to town, but commissioners are looking into getting more public transportation. There are plans for a dog park, raised garden beds, even pickleball. One of the biggest advantages will be having a community center with medical care on site. Clermont County funded Phase 1 with ARPA money. The Clermont Metropolitan Housing Authority will own and manage the village. Plans are already in the works for Phase 2. There are some limitations for tiny homes, be it a single structure or a village. Zoning. Before you build one, check to make sure it complies with local ordinances. Some people put these on wheels. In most California counties, tiny homes on wheels are illegal, but one county now allows them. You have to apply for a yearly DMV registration and get proper inspections. Yes, they do cost less than a traditional home, but know that they are going to be more expensive than what you might see on Amazon or at Walmart because you need to take plumbing and electricity into account and build a foundation. And the most obvious limitation, there is less space. Can you live in one of these if you're used to having more stuff? Something to consider and something we'd like to hear from you about. Remember, if you want to learn more about tiny homes and other possible housing solutions, there are plenty of resources, including web articles, video and audio stories, and online extras. Go to cetconnect.org and thinktv.org, and while you're there, click on one of the big green buttons to tell your own housing journey. We'd really like to hear from you. We welcome to the microphone Hearns Laguerre Jr.
Hello.
Hey, Hearns.
What's up?
It's just you and me for the takeaways. Amy Coe's on assignment.
Okay, cool.
And in terms of tiny homes, you heard in this podcast that more than half of Americans say they would live in one of these.
Yeah, you know what? That's not all that surprising. I'm from New York, so although I wasn't familiar with tiny homes, I was familiar with tiny apartments. The city is littered with them. And although New York doesn't represent half the population, I think they are very similar. They cover tiny apartments and tiny homes cover about the same square footage, about 400 square feet. And one thing I realized is that you really have to maximize space. Your couch doubles as your bed. Your kitchen table doubles as your work table. These are just some examples. But this online newsletter called apartmenttherapy.com, they really stress that to live in a tiny home, you have to be a minimalist. You can't really store a lot of things. You have to purge so that you can conserve space. There's lots of planning in regards to figuring out bathroom needs, especially for mobile tiny homes. And also you got to think about weather conditions. In short, if you're willing to deal with the price of seemingly varied inconveniences to save some money, tiny homes might be for you.
I really like the name of that newsletter.
Yeah.
Apartment Therapy.
Yeah. I feel like if I were to live in a tiny home, I would need apartment therapy.
But if you lived in one of these tiny homes, you could prioritize things that you need. For an example, one of the TVs showed a woman who liked to cook, and she was like, bet you don't think I have a food pantry? Well, I do.
Yeah.
And so she carved out a space for that. What's really encouraging is that there are all these tiny home villages popping up, some of them around here. And just because they're in the early stages doesn't mean they're not already thinking about expanding. For example, Vista Village in Columbus, the next phase, Phase 2, they would like to include single parents, and they're going to make the tiny homes a little bit bigger. Community First in Texas, they already have 550 tiny homes. They're going to add more than 1,400 in the next couple of years. Veterans Village here in Clermont County, they initially wanted to build more than 19. They're starting with 19. That's all they had the funding for, but they're already talking about other phases. And Tiny Homes for Humanity here in Cincinnati, they're still looking for the land, but they would like to do 25. So all that very encouraging.
Yeah, I wonder if these construction companies are are more able to build these homes because they're using less materials. So I'm thinking that's less cost for them, and it's more effective to build more of these tiny homes.
Yeah, there's definitely a need.
Yeah.
And then I just briefly wanted to mention that you'll be hosting the next episode.
Yeah.
So I'll look forward to that. I know that we'll give a short tease about what that's about.
For sure. I'll keep the seat warm.
Coming up on the next episode of Brick by Brick, housing strategies in Northern Kentucky.
What has the highest likelihood of working here and what will help really put a dent into this estimated 6,600 housing units that we'll need over the next 5 years.
How will these ideas be utilized throughout the region? That's next time on Brick by Brick. That's our show. If you like what you hear, please rate and review our podcast. It makes it easier to find. We hope you learned something, and if you did, please tell your friends and family about it. For Amico Moore and Hearns Laguerre Jr., I'm Ann Thompson. We'll be back soon with more solutions. Take care. Our show is produced, hosted, and edited by me, Ann Thompson, with reporting and story editing from Hearns Laguerre Jr. and Amico Moore. Our executive producer is Mark Lammers. Our show consultant is Gloria Skursky. Gabe Wimberly is our audio engineer and mixer. Zach Kramer runs the lights and cameras. Derek Smith is our production specialist, and Jason Garrison is our production manager. Kelly May heads up our marketing and promotions, along with Mike Shea and Bridget Dillenberger. Alyssa Stephenson handles the website, and Steve Wright is our designer. Bill Dean and Andreas Kruja are the engineers for the show, and our chief content officer is Colin Shenamblo. Our music is from Universal Production Music. Brick by Brick, Solutions for a Thriving Community is a production of CET and Think TV, Southwest Ohio PBS member stations.